Welcome everybody to the secret history living inside your aquarium. That includes my aquarium today. And today what we're going to be talking about is substrates. So substrates, what do I mean by substrate? Well, substrate would be defined as anything that is the strata, that is the stuff down here at the bottom, well, not including all the shrimp and little shrimp pellets, but this is where you're going to place your, whether it's hardscape, so whether you're putting in stone for an aquascape, or wood, or plants, this is going to be the bottom of your tank. Now, to be considered is that you can have an active substrate, or you can have an inert substrate. And those are the two major categories when we're talking about substrate. So the first thing that you want to think of is if you had a bare bottom tank, it has surface area. Its surface area is glass. So the glass, it still has a certain amount, when you look at it closely, there's a certain amount of surface area that can have fingerprints or fish waste and biological matter, smudges, oils, those things on it. And eventually it will build up what we call mulm or algae if you don't clean it. And all of those things, they may look unsightly to you, but they actually have a really crucial role in our aquarium world. And so in this video, I'm going to start here with a dirted tank, and I'm going to show you guys with this. A puff of this will show you how messy each substrate gets. We're going to go through dirted, we're going to go to gravel and coral mix, and then we're going to go to fluorite and coarse sand, and then we're going to go to ADA Amazonia in Eco-Complete, and then we'll go also to some of the other substrates that are specifically for shrimp or for animals that need a lower pH, or rather a higher acidity. So for certain shrimps, so that would be Brightwell is a brand, Eco-Complete by Carib Sea is another one. So it really depends on what you need out of your aquarium. So let's start off with dirt, because if you want to do research, look up the Diane Walsted method, and you will find everything you need to know about layering a dirt aquarium. Generally, what you're going to do is you're going to put some gravel in your substrate at the bottom, and then you're going to fill it in with soil. Now, this could be, it could be actual potting soil, it could be an aqua soil, or it could be something like ADA Amazonia, something like that. But dirted generally means that it's soil from outside, which is active. And as I was saying, there's active substrates and there are inert substrates. This happens to be an active substrate, and one of the major pros to this is you're going to get beautiful plants, beautiful color, lots of things will spread and grow naturally, so plants are going to travel through this substrate and grow, whereas with gravel and other substrates, they may grow and they may travel, but you're probably going to want root tabs, you're going to need to put fertilizer in the water column, and depending on the plants, they may need extra help from light and things like that. But before we jump in and I show you all these kinds, let's keep in mind, what is your goal? If your goal is to breed fish, then maybe just a blank bottom tank with nothing is fine, because it's not a long-term tank. If it is to grow a beautiful, thick, lush, super dense, super compact, colorful aquascape, whether it be wild like this, jungle style, or whether it be well manicured and looks like a miniature diorama of a mountainscape, you're probably going to want an active substrate. Now, the downside to active substrates is mostly having to do with how you cycle them. So when you cycle an active substrate, it has all sorts of minerals and oftentimes vitamins. If it's an aqua soil, a true aqua soil, it will actually have, or potting soil for that matter, it sometimes will have fertilizer added, and you don't want that usually. Perlite is okay in there, but you don't want a ton of active fertilizer because that has ammonia producing properties. And sometimes it has straight up nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia, and that's what kills fish. But eventually, even if you do use something that's completely fortified with it, you will grow enough beneficial bacteria on all the surfaces in your tank that will even out. Now, if you use something like gravel that's inert, with a hard stone gravel, you may actually cycle your tank in 2 weeks or something like that. If you're using one of these substrates that puts off ammonia, what you'll see is it'll start very even, not much ammonia. All of a sudden you'll see ammonia of 2 parts per million, or maybe even 3 or 4 parts per million. And what you'll have to do without fish in the tank is you'll need to be doing water changes constantly. 50% a day for maybe the first week or two, then maybe 25% or 30% every other day. But it could be up to a month, even a month and a half if it's a large tank, before the ammonia has been put into check by beneficial bacteria. Now you're either going to have a filter that's a hang off the back, and you see all this brown crud in here. This is great. It smells earthy. It smells like mulch. It doesn't smell like fish poop or anything. And there's algae growing with it. So it's got a symbiotic relationship. I have a video on this stuff, which is the slimy layer, and it's everything from fungi that can be an antibacterial to colonies of bacteria, all the way to micro protozoa, nematodes, little critters that can feed your fish and shrimp. So that's one major plus to having an active substrate, is all the life that can come from having organic material. Now, in our hobby, most of the substrates are not going to be just soil that's broken down compostable leaves and food and other byproducts like that. Most of it is going to be compressed, compact little clay pellets that come from somewhere in Japan or China. Some of it's from around the US, but a lot of it comes from Japan and China, from volcanic soil, which has traits that make it so that the pH in your water stays relatively low. So around 6.0 if you're starting with 7.0 or 7.5 tap water that's fairly neutral. Now you can see how much everything's growing in here, and that's because the plants have enough ammonia, they have enough iron, magnesium, potassium, nitrites, nitrates. The fish are adding more of the nitrites, nitrates, and ammonia. Anything that dies or poops is going to be adding that to your tank. And then we've got shrimp by the boatload here that are also working on clearing that out. I wanted to point out, just because I've mentioned it in other videos, but look how blue some of these Malawa shrimp are becoming now. I don't know. I'm really convinced that some of these are mixed shrimp, honestly. But that's a whole other subject. So I've got lots of different shrimp in here. So this video isn't super long, I want to just show you something. Another part of when you have a substrate like this, I have it layered, and we'll go into layering in another video. Right now I'm just going to show you a soil substrate. I've got the turkey baster, and I'm going to fill it with water, and then I'm going to squeeze it and show you what comes up when I disturb the substrate. So we're going to do 2 pumps, and look at that. So anytime you move a plant, you're going to be getting that just crazy amount of debris, of soil. Now, with this stuff, you don't really need to gravel vac it with, with your hose or siphon. Sometimes you might want to siphon off just the top layer of this stuff, but if you have baby shrimp and other things like that, it's really hard to do that without taking out the baby shrimp if you want to get any big clods of dirt. The denser dirt will stay at the bottom. The rocks and sand that ideally you put under there, you just don't see it at the front because aesthetically I put dirt for about an inch. That will then allow the proper bacteria to form underneath as well, and will allow the plant roots to go through the soil less thickly than compacted mud, essentially. So this is your aqua soils and things like that. They're going to have the pro of being amazing for your plants and having lots of organic byproducts that are great for little teeny creatures and for breeding long term in your tank, for having things that give lots of beautiful color to your plants. But you need to be aware that you need to have the proper light, CO2, and liquid nutrients in the water column for that to be worth your while. So do some research on if you need high light or low light. Many of these are stem plants. Many of these have colors in them. And so the iron in the soil, the magnesium, the potassium, all that stuff plays a role. The phosphates regulate metabolism in these plants. So it's slowly trapped in the soil, and for several years, usually between a year and 3 or 4, it will be good. But you can see it doesn't settle down. So it's a major mess if you like to fiddle with your tank to move things. If you want it to look super clean, it can be an issue. But it will give you great results as far as everything growing. So let's hop over to another version of the tank like this, which is in here. I have a bit of crushed coral because I kept guppies in here at one point. I have a pea-size gravel or smaller, and then below that we have soil and mulm that's built up. Now mulm is just poop and fish waste and things like that. It's a myth that you need to gravel vac your aquarium. As long as you have good circulation and a large deposit of beneficial bacteria, again, in a hang off the back or a cartridge filter, this one needs to be changed, it popped up. But there's layers of bio balls, bio beads under that, and then there's the batting and the sponge and then the polishing cloth on top of that. So that is constantly sucking through every hour. This tank turns over its water about 8 times with the size filter I have on it. So if you look here, you're still getting the debris and stuff at the bottom, but you've got that gravel overcoat. Now you'll see that plants, they're still doing decently. You can see bulb plants do really well here. It's great for setting stone down in here and little caves. All your Anubias and your Java ferns, your Java moss, all that stuff is going to be fine in here because it doesn't need the soil. It just needs the water column. Now with these kind of plants though, I would say regardless of the substrate, you want to put nutrients in the water column. So that's when you're going to go look for something like Flourish XL, Aqua, some of the brands ADA makes that has Brighty Green, Brighty K, some of the things like Dustin's Fish Tank or Aquarium Co-op's Easy Green, something that you can add. You can also buy all the minerals yourself and make your own mixture, but it's easy to have a once a day or once a week, or it depends on the regiment you want and what you're growing and how much of it. But and again on your lights, because if you have a low light tank, there's no sense in slamming it full of fertilizer all the time. You're not going to get the returns you want. And same with the colors. Without CO2 and the right nutrients, you're not going to get it either. But in here, you'll see that we do have plants that send out roots that are doing well. We have in here, we have things like bulbitis also that don't need, the ferns that don't need real roots. They use rhizomes. And those can be affixed to any hardscape that's in your tank. but I just wanted to show you this tank and how it's kind of a hybrid of that. Now, I will show you downstairs, we have another tank that's similar, but the plus side of this is when I move things around in this tank, I don't get these giant plumes of dirt. I do get debris, but that can then be mechanically filtered. So let's hop on downstairs and we will take a look at the other kinds of substrate that I utilize. Now, some of these substrates people might be a little bit unfamiliar with, or they haven't used them, but don't be afraid of that fact. So up here you can see no substrate at all, but I'm not using any power heads. So if I had a hang off the back filter here and power heads, I could keep the bottom of this clean. However, I don't. I use a sponge filter, and this is for shrimp. So for my shrimp breeding purposes, this tank does phenomenal. I have lots of shrimp, snails. The snails can get fed to pea puffers. And I put leaves and plants in here like mosses, hornworts, things like that that don't need a root structure. Red root floaters and some things like that. But I'm not getting any nutrients out of the ground. You can see there's a little bit of crushed coral, which will actually increase the pH. Now with shrimp, you usually want to decrease the pH, but my tap water has been coming out slightly acidic, and the catappa leaves or any decomposition of organic matter usually brings pH down slightly, as well as tannins. Now here we have a mix of fluorite. So this is kind of in between. So we have a sand cap of this white sand from Carib Sea. We have fluorite stones and some pebbles in here. And at the bottom we have chunkier gravel, and then up top we've got some chunky gravel too. Now one of the downsides of this is you can grow anaerobic bacteria. If you use all sand, you're going to find that it stratifies. You can use a sand cap if you don't mess with stuff a ton. But here, I bet you if we start to poke around at all with this, there'll be spots. Yes, there's little spots where you get bubbles of sulfur. Now, it's debatable how dangerous that sulfur is, but anaerobic bacteria can have negative side effects, so that's something to consider. But as far as having things like Valsinaria, Vesuvius, chain sword, chain dwarf sword, things like that will grow okay in this if you put root tabs in it and things in the water column like fertilizers. However, you're also more prone to getting algae and things like that on surfaces because it's just as easy to grow here as it is to penetrate into the sand. Also, you know, we've got Bacopa, so the roots are able to move through sand, but it's a path of resistance and it can take years. So we also have Crypnuri, Crypt flamingo, Crypt undulata, things like that, but their roots are not super secure, and usually they're fairly weak when you have a dense substrate like this. Now, the other thing is, a substrate like this, you're probably going to want a gravel vat, because watch when I do the same two puffs here. You kick up this debris, and this is essentially just fish poop and leaf matter. And some of this, the bacteria will break it down so it's harmless. It's basically a dirt or a soil, a silt, just like you'd find at the bottom of a lake or river. But it can get toxic if it builds up too thick and has nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia growing off of that richness of the sustenance that's in it. So what I like to do is either have a soil tank, or in this case, to have a pea gravel tank. So if you don't want to have all the fuss of dealing with different levels of stratifying sand and things like that, you can still grow your crypts. See, it can grow easily through the cracks of a medium-sized gravel or for that matter, a big stone, bigger size gravel if you're working with a bigger tank. Now, do these plants look as healthy? I would venture to say no. You can still grow your Anubias, you can still grow your Java ferns, your hornwort, all that stuff that feeds out of the water column will be fine, but your substrate here also runs the risk of growing algae at a pretty high rate. It runs the risk of pocketing up and stratifying. The smaller pieces move down. Let's give it a puff here. And that's just lots of junk, you know. And if you had a power head on here and a hang off the back filter, even though there is a hang off the back filter, that does eliminate some of it. But for aesthetic reasons, you may not like that. You may not like the algae that grows on the rocks and things when they're of a bigger size. And you're definitely going to want to use root tabs or an under gravel filter. An under gravel filter being an older type of filter, but works fine. Now down here, we have a mix. So this has Brightwell, which it keeps the pH low. You can add crushed coral to raise the pH and make it harder. But when you have something like that with carbon and calcium, which usually shrimp keepers worry about the most, what that does is that buffers your alkalinity. So if it's too acidic or too basic, it gives less wiggle room. It can absorb that difference when you have crushed coral or some sort of calcium or limestone, and your pH may hover around 8 if you're using coral or limestone. And that's about if you add about a pound per 10 gallons, and it goes up from there if you're using pure coral. However, if you use something like Brightwell Soil, which has volcanic ash that has a lot of carbon that can bond to some of the acidic things and break down, and pardon this dirt on here, who just did water changes last night and must have dripped on them. But here we have Brightwell, and you can actually you could fill a little cup like this and set it in the corner, and as long as water's flowing and moving around, that will actually keep your pH low also. So in this tank, the pH is about 6.0, and it harbors these little guys, which need a low TDS, so that means total dissolved solids, and they also need a low pH. And that's because they live in mountain streams with just a little bit of decaying plant matter. However, you can see that because of that volcanic ash, which has nutrients in it, which is made into pellets in the form of Brightwell, it is an active substrate. Now, it did not cause a spike in ammonia because it wasn't organically active. It was chemically active in the sense of it has a pH that is different than neutral, and it is able to change the pH here as well as give nutrients and minerals to the plants. So minerals and metals are one form of help that you can get from a substrate like Brightwell, like Fluval stratum, like Fluval Carib Sea Eco Complete. But you also need to know if you're using Amazonia ADA or something like that, or an Aqua Soil. That's when you get your organic elements. And even though those will help things grow, and they will help probably because of the clay and the minerals as well, they'll help keep your pH slightly lower than neutral, slightly more acidic, that is. Which is how many tropical fish live due to all the debris in the rivers that they live in. You know, there's leaves floating in rivers. You will get spikes though in those products that have decaying, soil. They still have matter, and even though that matter has lots of energy for your bacteria to give up and eat, and it will equalize in a little while. It can be messy, and it can cause ammonia and nitrate spikes. Whereas this stuff, let's give it the test. It has a little bit of debris and mulm going on in there, but really nothing major. I can move around plants. They set into it really well. I don't need to use little lead weights. Of course, again, the water column has more minerals because the Brightwell is made with volcanic soil and clay. Over here we have another bare bottom tank, same as up top. This is the quarantine tank, and there's just mulm on the bottom because I don't have a hang off the back, so I have to manually gravel vac that out of there every week. All right, so the last kind we're going to look at, which you might be the most curious about, is going to be ADA Aqua Soil. And this is Amazonia or Aqua Design Amano soil. This stuff is very amazing for allowing growth. So if you notice, it has taken I could plant a plant here and it will take over naturally, just like it should in the wild. You'll get all sorts of colors, and that depends on, so now I'm using CO2 again in this tank. I'm using a Fluval 3.0 light that's pretty intense, but you get the beautiful colors. You get the spreading of vegetation all through the substrate. You can set rocks in it. It's no big deal. You can oftentimes also get algae outbreaks with this because of that ammonia, because you need so much beneficial bacteria and other algae things breaking down all of those. That's not bad. If you go to a lake, you'll notice the same thing. But you can see, look at this slime that you can get rid of it if you want. But for me, it's a sign of a healthy tank. See how clean these are? And yet the water doesn't have a ton. Right now it's dialed in pretty good. You can watch some of my algae reduction videos also. But here we have liquid, the water column is also liquidly impregnated with nutrients. And you can see that things like my Java ferns are just doing incredible in here. All my floating plants, everything is doing great. Now, the downside, yes, you will have to wait longer for it to be completely cycled. There will be an ammonia spike, but you can grow rarer stem plants. You can get brighter colors if you're willing to use CO2 and lights and other, you could use root tabs. I think that's overkill with this stuff personally. And then you want to use a water column fertilizer for all those plants that are not just growing out of the soil. But this compacted bits of clay and soil will have organic compounds in it in many cases, and it will also have those mineral compounds. So when you're looking at a product, if it's not one of the ones I mentioned, you want to know if it's inert, and then you want to know, which means will it change my pH or chemical structure? And then you want to know, is it biologically active? So does it have things that are still decomposing and bacteria working in there, like some of the aqua soils you can buy impregnated with beneficial bacteria and just stuff that happens to be in the soil from a rich river or something, from a very fertile river. Whereas here, you'll see it breaks down a little bit. You can see you get layers of where the aqua soil pellets break down, but it's also going to buffer for you that pH. So it's going to stay in the 6 to 7 range for most folks. And plants, snails have great calcium in their shells, nice and hard. Everything is looking really good. Delicate plants looking good. Colorful plants looking good. And unlike the pure aqua soil, this is in pellet form. So you could put down a gravel layer to try to stop the amount of stratification and negative bacteria growing in there. The anaerobic bacteria, which means it doesn't use oxygen. And when we do this, yes, it kicks up some dirt, but it's really, it dissipates rather quickly, and you can move things around as you would like. So in the end, it's up to you, but you want to think about those main questions. Is it biologically active? Can I let it cycle? Do I need that for the plants I'm growing? Do I need those minerals in the first place for the fish, shrimp, or plants I have? Do I need a special pH for my plants, or or the shrimp that I have? And lastly, do I want to be moving things around once the tank is established? Do I want to be moving plants, redoing aquascapes, trimming everything, maybe moving something from this corner to that corner, that sort of thing? And do you have enough surface area that you're okay with growing different slime coats, essentially? So back here, I've got bags of volcanic rock. So this is Volcano Rock, just red rock, lava rock back in here, under here, in bags that's very hollow, like a pumice. And so it allows the water to move through it with a power head. And that is a form of both mechanical filtration, so then I can just gravel vac one corner. And then I've also got the overkill filters and everything kind of lifted up right now for you to check out. Also doing that. Now, another negative to the ADA type soils is, yes, they will make more dust and your filters can get clogged and overflow in theory. So just make sure you tilt your filters slightly up. A lot of them come with a piece that you can attach here to cause that tilt, like this right here, to not be so severe, so that even if it does overflow, it'll go into there. So I hope that helps you guys out with the basics of what the different substrates mean. Hope you can see why sand can be harmful and trap things in, whereas these gravels give a little more room for flow, but they don't have the nutrients, but they're not a mess. They're easy to gravel vac and just clean methodically. And the last note on those is you don't want to clean everything because it will get rid of all your good bacteria. That poopy, floaty stuff is actually good bacteria after it's been in there for a number of weeks. And so you want to make sure that you're allowing that to happen, as well as plants. If you take away all these plants all of a sudden, you're going to change the chemistry. So just because you have the ability with gravel, with coarse sand, and this could be neon pink sand or fluorite for that matter, those are going to be inert. They're hard enough. They don't put off minerals. They don't put off organics. So you're going to need root tabs, but you can move stuff until your heart's content. You can switch fish in and out. And really your plant load is the only thing you'll have to watch to make sure that, if you have a ton of plants in there, that you're not getting rid of all of them and shocking the fish by the amount of ammonia being processed and turned into nitrates. First, they'll be turned from ammonia to nitrites to nitrates. Nitrates you get out by either allowing the plants to eat it in the form of energy as they photosynthesize. Actually, they do it at night while not photosynthesizing when they're eating their sugars. And then by doing water changes, you literally remove it from the column. Now, this has the most fragility in that there's nothing in the water. So if you know your water's reliable, a reliable source of tap water and what's in it, and that your municipal water or you're on a well and it's the same year round, you know what chemicals are in it, this could be a fine way to go for you. Here we have a very low TDS of about 25 out of the tap most of the year, and a pH that's pretty neutral, around 7 to 7.2 usually. And that allows me to have crystal caridina shrimp, babalti caridina shrimp in here, and even neocaridina, but they need some calcium supplements for food. That's another story. But that's why I'm using that. And if you don't trust your tap water and you need some buffer, then I would go with one of the volcanic pressed buffering soils like Brightwell, like Carib Sea's Eco Complete or Fluval Stratum, things like that. And just check which ones have the possibility of an ammonia spike or not. Because even once it's cycled, if you have it too thick, if you have it more than about 1.5 inches or 2 inches thick, it will stratify what bacteria live there due to light, food, nutrients, and oxygen levels. And when you disturb that, it can undo things. So I hope this has helped demystify a little bit about Substrate, and I hope it was in depth enough that you guys got the hang of it. If you stuck around this far and for the whole thing, please give this a like. If you want to support the channel in other ways, we do have a Patreon. I do sell botanical illustrations and also fish illustrations, some fun steampunk artwork, as well as anatomically and biologically correct artwork. And there's a link to the storefront on Spring Tea or Teespring for that as well. Thanks for joining me. Take care of your critters, your plants, the people around you, and it will come back to you tenfold. I will talk to you next time. Swim on.